What's up? Welcome to episode number 129 of the People We Love podcast. I am Adam Choi. If you're new here, what I do is interview people from all walks of life, most often comedians and other entertainment types about their lives and careers. The conversation is casual, but I also ask everyone to highlight the people they love, who've inspired them, who've influenced them, or helped them in their career, journey, etc., etc. For more about this show, check out peoplewelovepodcast.com. That's peoplewelovepodcast.com, and the Instagram handle is at peoplewelovepodcast. And I am on Instagram and Twitter as well, at Adam Choi, if you want to follow me. And please remember to tap subscribe or follow on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on, and please subscribe on the YouTube channel as well, People We Love Podcast. And of course, positive reviews on Apple Podcasts are greatly appreciated too. I have another podcast, Tedeschi Trucks podcast, all about the 12-piece blues rock soul powerhouse band, Tedeschi Trucks Band. If you're into that type of music, you definitely want to check that out too, at Tedeschi Trucks podcast on Instagram, TEDESCHI Trucks podcast. And it's the same on YouTube with spaces, Tedeschi Trucks podcast. But for today's episode of this podcast, I have Mississippi's own writer, activist, and former archaeologist, Reed Cooley, joining me. Reed recalls always being a curious kid and an avid reader, and was always interested in learning more about people and how this world works. Constantly evolving both professionally and philosophically, this nearly straight-A student recalls his contribution to Young Americans for Liberty, and recalls working on Glenn Jacobs' WWE's Kane, that mayoral campaign in Tennessee. And of course, Reed tells me all about Dr. Ron Paul's impact on him and what it was like to meet Dr. Paul, the man himself. But let's just get started. Here's Reed Cooley. Okay, so it's good to see you today, Reed Cooley. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Not a problem, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Oh, for sure. How are you holding up during whatever year this is?
I'm doing pretty well, everything considered. We had some bad weather pass through where I live. So I live in South Mississippi, a little town called Laurel, not Yanny, Laurel, Laurel. There's actually a famous TV show. It's like the most famous TV show on HGTV. It's called Hometown. It takes place just a few minutes from where I live. We had some bad weather coming through like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. Some communities nearby me got really wrecked. It's people's houses got just completely destroyed or torn in half or whatever. We got through that okay. Now I'm just recuperating from a long Mother's Day weekend.
Did you say it was tornadoes that is a lot of the bad weather you're dealing with?
Yeah. We had a bad wave of tornadoes just a few days apart come through where I live. Like I said, it's a small town called Laurel, Mississippi. I'm probably an hour and a half from the Gulf Coast, so pretty far down in the south. And we had just some pretty bad weather, but my community, my family, we seem to have made it through all that okay.
Oh, that's good. So you're based in Mississippi, you said?
Yes, sir. That's where I grew up. So I spent the first 20 years of my life in Mississippi, here where my family lives. Then I went to college. I went to Baylor University. While I was at Baylor, spent some time overseas working. So my first career was actually in archaeology. That's what I went to school as an undergraduate to study. I was a double major in anthropology and history. My first career, before I went to the dark side and jumped into politics, was as an historical archaeologist. Now, you might wonder, Reed, why are you saying historical archaeologist? Isn't all archaeology at least somewhat historical? It's true, but there's a distinction in archaeology between historic archaeology or historical archaeology and prehistoric archaeology. So historical archaeology is any kind of archaeology that involves written records of some kind, where you're studying or you're excavating remains from a culture where there's some kind of written records that you can use to help sort of corroborate what it is you're finding. Whereas with prehistoric archaeology, like studying, Paleo-Indians or something like that, there's no written record you can use. There are no original primary source material, from that culture that you could use to study them. So I studied historical archaeology. I guess the two areas I was most interested in was classical archaeology. So when I was overseas in Italy in the summer of 2016, I worked on a project just north of Rome in a place called Bavarano Romano. And there we worked, we did a project in kind of what's the equivalent of an Italian national park, excavating a few tombs, collecting data points on some ancient tombs dating to between the 7th century and the 2nd centuries BC. The Etruscan culture, they were a culture of a people who lived outside central and northern Italy, so pre-Roman. The modern word Tuscan is etymologically derived from Etruscan, and the Romans actually adopted a lot of the Etruscans' customs as they spread first from a large republic into a massive empire. So yeah, I did that. But after that project and then 2 archaeological excavations I did here in the United States, I just decided that archaeology was a fantastic hobby. I didn't really make the best career, meaning there just wasn't any light at the end of the financial tunnel. So I still do a little bit of archaeological work avocationally, but my career is and has been political activism for about 5 years. Instead of digging up old people in their garbage, I decided that I wanted to dig up garbage on my political enemies. So you might say there's a little bit of overlap between archaeology and politics, but not much overlap.
You found the overlap.
Yeah, there's a Venn diagram that can be used here. There's like the bubbles barely touch, and then it's exactly where the bubbles touch, but that's about it. So decided to go into politics, and I guess politically, I've undergone a lot of a metamorphosis as well. So when I first got sort of involved in politics, it was just doing some campus activism while I was studying to become an archaeologist. Began as sort of a young college Democrat. I've never really been that far left ideologically, but whenever I started off politically, I was probably just center left, probably like a blue dog Democrat, with a lot of socially conservative values, with some fiscally conservative values as well. But I felt like I was just liberal enough, just left leaning enough rather, to feel like at the time, I'm talking about 2013, 2014, like I probably belonged with the Democratic Party as opposed to the Republican Party or even the Libertarian Party. But it was around that time period where I was first starting to get really politically curious, that I started, just making friends with people who had different political views than me, right? And I was making friends with centrists, with other leftists, with conservatives, with socialists, with libertarians, anarchists of the right, anarchists of the left, really every stripe of person. And among all these different ideologies, libertarianism began to make the most sense to me. It was something that really gave me kind of the moral clarity to navigate the complexities of the multifaceted world in which we live. It was the most logically consistent, and I still believe it's the most logically consistent philosophy of them all. So just over time, I wouldn't say there was any one magical eureka moment where I woke up and realized, oh my God, I'm a libertarian. My values are libertarian. It was really a gradual process where I was just sort of investigating on a really deep level, one issue at a time, where I felt like I really stood on issues politically and economically. And just discovered that if I was a Democrat, I was a really bad one. I wasn't very good at it. So I have to be a libertarian. And so after I decided I wanted to leave archaeology, I called some people at Young Americans for Liberty, this organization that I was involved with as a college student. And I said, look, I want to get in the fight for libertarianism, for the Ron Paul revolution. So they connected me with some campaign opportunities. I worked on a lot of campaigns over 2018. Then in November of that year, I took on a full-time communications position there at the company. Long story short, at Young Americans for Liberty, I really built the entirety of the organization's communications and marketing apparatus. So everything from TV to radio, podcast op-eds, press releases, to social media, all of that. I didn't necessarily lay the foundation for all those. Young Americans for Liberties had a Facebook page since 2010, but I did take them all to the next level, and I systematized how the organization engages each of these different kinds of media, and really built a company's first ever communications program as the company's vice president of communications. I left earlier this year, and now I've been working. I have my hand in several different cookie jars, you might say. Still staying very much involved in libertarian politics. Yeah, I've been doing several different kinds of work, everything from writing different articles for different publications to helping start a couple of companies that more or less have to be a little bit quiet about for now. But yeah, I'll say that that's pretty much me in a nutshell. You might say, at least as far as my career is concerned.
Yeah, that's quite a story. I actually want to go way back towards like when you were a kid and figure out. Well, this doesn't have to be linear, of course, but I want to hear more about your childhood. Did you grow up with siblings, and what led you to studying archaeology? What were you into in like elementary school, even like that young, like memories that jump out at you?
So when I was a kid, I was a pretty like introverted kid. Now, but I didn't care much for talking to other kids or socializing with other kids that much. But yeah, so I guess the place to start to keep it interesting. Oh, what the hell? So just beginning, first, second grade, it was pretty clear. Like, okay, Reed, he's not antisocial, but nothing really ever gets to him. He doesn't really care much for socializing with other kids. That said, I was honestly much more likely to be seen reading something. Whenever I was in elementary school, going all the way through, probably my senior year of high school, I was actually interested in astronomy more than anything. So I was pretty much convinced that I wanted to be an astronomer all the way until about I don't know, maybe my senior year of high school. I had just dozens and dozens of books on the subject of astronomy. Most specifically, I was fascinated with exoplanetology.
What's that?
So that is a very niche portion of astronomy that focuses on the study of planets that exist outside of our solar system. So I found that hugely fascinating, because whenever you're studying planets that are unlike the ones that we're accustomed to learning about in school and stuff like that, you can wind up with just a huge variety of different worlds, right? At the same time, growing up, I was also interested in fiction, mostly like science fiction, fantasy fiction, and horror, right? So I feel like there was a little bit of overlap between my fascination with exoplanetology, studying all these different kinds of planets that exist outside of our solar system, and what possibly exist on the surface of those planets and everything, with sort of like my fascination with science fiction and fantasy fiction, just a fixation with other worlds, a fixation with other places, and maybe there's a little bit of a spillover between that and just my love for travel. I mean, I've been bitten by the travel bug. I was bitten by the travel bug pretty hard, whenever I was a kid. I don't think that the venom from that has ever really gone away, so to speak. But I guess that was sort of a deep fixation. I was wanting to understand other places. But whenever I got into my senior year of high school, I felt like I needed to think a little bit more seriously about like a real kind of pragmatic career. So I switched from astronomy to geology. So there was enough interest in geology there to sort of satisfy what I was interested in. What I was most interested in the field of astronomy, but geology, there were better career prospects and all that. I went through geology for a couple of years there in college until about the end of my sophomore year in college. And then I just decided that I wasn't all that happy. And I really wasn't happy at all studying this. There really was a human element that was necessary, in order for me to be happy in my career. In geology, I felt like I was studying something tangible, something I could hold in my hand. There's something nice and refreshing about that. At the same time, however, like it's completely detached from things that really, fascinated me on a deeper level, which is, just questioning the human condition, trying to understand what it means to be human. So I found something that kind of had one foot in geology and one foot in the social sciences, which just piqued my interest, a lot more. It took a long time to figure that out. It took a long time of just reading different kinds of source material and really just kind of exploring myself to see what my most keen academic interests were. So archaeology just kind of stood out to me. I was actually able to take a lot of what I had learned in geology, and I was able to apply it to the study of human beings, right? So anthropology, which archaeology is considered a part of, anthropology is quite simply just the scientific study of human beings, right? In the same way that a herpetologist studies reptiles, or a primatologist studies primates, or an entomologist studies insects, an anthropologist studies human beings, right? But in order to really understand so much of what makes human beings different than any other animal species, you have to take into account this thing called culture, right? Which, it seems to be exclusive to our species, right? So anthropology just, that's, so I didn't really find anthropology. It almost felt like anthropology just kind of found me at that point. And anthropology allowed me to satisfy a lot of other academic and intellectual interests I have everywhere else, right? My last couple of years in college, I stayed pretty true to studying anthropology, but so that's kind of how all that happened. It was probably a series of different arcs that I went through. First, while I was still in high school, then again, my first couple of years of college, then kind of my second half of my college career. And then, of course, after graduating from college and realizing I wanted to really do politics, I wanted to actually engage, the political system. I've undergone a good bit of metamorphoses. I understand that can be a weakness, but I also think it's been a tremendous strength in the sense that it has allowed me to gain at least a certain amount of mastery over a lot of different topics, right? Now, obviously, politics and anthropology are two issue areas that I would probably most readily consider myself an expert on, but I have found that I'm able to keep up conversations with a lot of different people across a lot of different subjects. And I would say that, it's been a little bit of a blessing. I do think that the idea of a Renaissance man or a Renaissance woman is a seriously underestimated and underappreciated notion in our world. I do think that we need people who are, obviously people don't need to be serial dabblers. They don't need to, explore every single area at such a superficial level that they can't possibly contribute value, except at the level of a dilettante on anything. But I do think that there's a lot of merit to being well-rounded. Like we look at our own founding fathers who were very flawed men. I don't think that there's anybody that really questions that. Even the most steadfast defenders of the founding fathers would acknowledge, they were flawed. But Jefferson, for example, he was part historian, part lawyer. He was also a brilliant archaeologist. Thomas Jefferson worked on a lot of archaeological projects in his own home state of Virginia. Not a lot of people know that. He was smart enough at architecture that he was actually able to design his own home at Monticello. A lot of people don't know that. But, the complexity and the quality of the prose that he was able to write, and many of his political writings, it's enough to rival almost any other communicator at any point in history in the English language, right? Benjamin Franklin, also an absolutely brilliant Renaissance man, right? So Benjamin Franklin being an absolutely amazing writer, amazing thinker. He was a businessman. He was able to keep his family's newspaper up and going, which I think really gave him access to the ability to influence, public knowledge. But Benjamin Franklin was also a smart enough scientist that he was able to calculate all of the oceanic currents in the Northern Atlantic Ocean to such an extreme degree of accuracy that Benjamin Franklin's work from the 18th century is actually still cited by geologists today. So I do think that there's a ton of merit, and like these are men who were absolutely brilliant. They were discovering electricity, and then they said on Wednesday, let's go build this government, right?
That's crazy.
It is crazy. Like I said, these were deeply flawed men. A lot of them were, I won't dispute that, but I think that in order to build a better world, to truly build a better world, which is what I like to think that my focus is in politics, instead of just making sure that one party or any one political ideology, including my own wins. I think that we need brilliant, well-rounded people, much in the same tradition as those who built this country. I guess that's, I hope that kind of answers your question.
That answered a lot. No, I can definitely see the connections, I think, between some of your interests. I mean, you totally seem like a very curious person, an avid reader as a kid, and you probably did well in school, I'm guessing, or did you only do well in science?
No, I did pretty well. I wasn't a straight A student every semester, but I was a straight A student almost every semester. Graduated with honors from Baylor. Took a lot of honors courses when I was still in community college before I transferred to Baylor. So, I would say that that's probably the case.
Where does it come from? Your academic ability and your just curiosity as a kid, especially for the sciences, and it almost seems to me like you're narrowing things down. First you start in outer space, and then you're narrowing it down to more of the earth type sciences, and then you want to connect it more to humanity, and then you want to dive deeper into humanity. And it just makes me think that your engagement in politics and interest in politics is just studying the study of man and studying history, but on a more like current, present, tangible level where you can like see the results like right away. We can make change right now and influence tomorrow or the day after in 2 years, and you get that satisfaction. I'm guessing you get that satisfaction and more immediate gratification working in politics, perhaps more than things in the past. But it's also interesting because I'm sure like you draw, like you're saying in the conversations, you draw on all these different areas in your background. So I just don't think people's like professional journeys are like it's not an accident. I just think that like there will be some sort of not convolution. I don't know what the word is, but I think congregation
like
of conglomeration of things that you studied in the past that will benefit you in the present and in ways you don't know how until they're happening in the current moment. But where did you get like this curiosity? Does it come from your parents? Was there a science teacher in high school that you remember or something like that? Or is it just reading and you kind of just naturally, organically were drawn to the human condition and especially the sciences?
That's a fantastic question. I would say that within my family, there was a good bit of influence, of sort of positive influence. A lot of people, relatives, they really did invest in my education. They wanted me to be a good student. They wanted me to learn. I don't think that's ultimately where it came from, though. As far as how it developed, it goes so far back. I mean, it's hard to say. I think there's a common thread that links all these different sort of intellectual interests that I've described, and that is it consists in two parts. Number one is a deep desire to understand what I call the human condition. I want to understand what it means to be human and the kind of conflicts that human beings go through, right? And then B, I want to understand what it takes to improve that condition, which is probably why politics seems to appeal to me so much, because that's actually an opportunity to take everything that I have read, in whether it's in economics or in history, philosophy, anthropology, even mythology. I pull from, I study mythology, specifically Greek and Norse mythology on a pretty deep level, as well as various Native American mythologies like Navajo and Cherokee, not only because that's a part of anthropology, but because I think there are bits of timeless wisdom that we can learn, from the mythologies and the religions of ancient peoples. Timeless wisdom meaning lessons that we can and should apply to our lives today. I absolutely think that. So, but political engagement allows me to take observations that I make in other academic areas about what it means to be human, about the kinds of struggles that we go through, and actually apply them in a sort of tangible way. Through political action, political engagement. I guess you could say, by approaching an institution that has some level of influence over every other human being around me, like government, perhaps other than gravity, really affects us as human beings on a deeper level more than any other force in this world, right? And so, I mean, if you're trying to improve the human condition, so to speak, if you're just trying to make your community a better place or a freer place, then government is a very good place to start. So I would say, politics, understanding the social sciences as well as, some of the hard sciences, they can really help me understand what it means to be human. And in order to really gain a full grasp of what it means to be human, you have to at least understand the human environment, meaning, the surroundings, everything that is surrounding us as humans. You have to understand it at least to some extent. And then, like I said, politics just allows me to carry those observations and translate them into some kind of meaningful action elsewhere in the world.
Were you always asking yourself these deep questions, even as a kid? Were you always sort of asking yourself these deep questions? It seems like, I'm guessing, yes.
Yeah, I was. I would say I can remember having thoughts kind of like that going all the way back to probably the first grade or kindergarten, exploring questions that I could only assume other little kids weren't necessarily thinking about all the time. There's an important distinction I like to apply to myself, is that I don't consider myself a quick thinker. I consider myself a deep thinker. Like I am not really interested in shooting from the hip with the quippiest kind of comeback or the sassiest tweet or something like that as other people. I mean, like whenever I tweet something, for example, or I write something into an article, or I deliver a video, or I'm sharing my opinion on something. I mean, it's as a result of months, if not years, of introspection that I've done on that particular topic.
That's not the norm for most Americans and most people, and certainly not for most kids, teenagers, young adults. Like, you really, like the way you were describing, like how open you were to different political philosophies and being honest with yourself and not having sort of a foundation of principles or things that you believe in, but just being open to different types of philosophies and different people. That is definitely like an unusual thing in terms of just being that open at that age and wanting to talk to other people. Like, most, especially now, everyone just kind of like obviously is just like yells and screams whatever their belief is and has no interest in that. Tell me about the journey from archaeology into politics, because you did mention the Ron Paul revolution. So I'm guessing that Ron Paul had quite an influence on you, even if your political metamorphosis was more gradual. But tell me about like when things really started to pick up steam and Ron Paul's influence.
It was about 2015, 2016 that I got my hands on a copy of In the Fed, one of the works in Ron Paul's trilogy. I think I read it a little bit at a time over the course of about a week. The first member of the Austrian School of Economics that I read, his name was Friedrich Hayek, F.A. Hayek. I'm sure your audience is at least somewhat familiar with him. I got my hands on his writings not long after that, specifically The Road to Serfdom, and that began to change me a little bit at a time. It wasn't much longer after that I started to read a little bit of Murray Rothbard and some Milton Friedman as well, but I was much more drawn to Murray Rothbard. I was drawn to probably almost every idea that I had encountered, by him at the time. That was about 2015, 2016. By the end of 2015, I think I had probably pretty well come to terms with the fact that I really just didn't belong around, Democrat politics. I really just didn't belong in the Democratic Party. It just wasn't a vehicle that really reflected my views. So I became a Republican. So I'm a member of the Republican Party. I have been. That's not because I love the Republican Party. I despise the Republican Party's leadership. I really hate who's been running the Republican Party for a long time. But the Republican Party can be the most effective possible vehicle, in my opinion, for the libertarian philosophy. I just don't see the Libertarian Party, this distant third place, I wouldn't even call them a contender, as being something viable. I love the Mises Caucus. I really do respect the fire out of what Michael Heiss and Angela McArdle are doing within that party. I just think that on a pragmatic level, politics is really about winning. I mean, it's not necessarily about engaging in some sort of dialectical process whereby people from opposing, points of view come together, try and find, the greatest possible outcome for their constituents. And then that's not how politics really is. Politics is about beating whoever you're up against, right? Every now and again, different factions can find a positive way to compromise and they can generate a net positive. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. But that's ultimately not what the real nature of politics consists of. We're talking about a practice that is the adjudication of power. So just because I wanted to be an effective person, in my political activism, I said, okay, well, I'm pretty doggone libertarian, but I think the Republican Party is a better vehicle for this. I can at least get some of what I want to accomplish done inside of this party. So I went from probably like center left kind of blue dog Democrat to libertarian Republican. Whenever I look at Dr. Paul, for example, he ran for president 3 different times. A lot of people don't know that. He ran for president the first time on the Libertarian Party ticket in 1988. And then, of course, he ran for president more famously in 2008 and 2012 as a Republican. There is a reason people forget that he ran for president in 1988 as a libertarian, meaning a member of the Libertarian Party. That's because it had absolutely no impact on anything whatsoever, except for very deep inside baseball libertarian political drama, meaning the kind of squabbles that we see happening on libertarian Twitter that we just roll our eyes at and scoff past. I said that, well, Ron Paul made the impact on me, because he was running as a Republican, because he was trying to warp Republican politics in a good way, right? He was trying to introduce something good to a vehicle where it could matter most. And had Dr. Paul run for president on the LP ticket in 2008 instead of on the GOP ticket, where it really mattered, the Giuliani moment would have never happened. The famous Giuliani moment, where he retorts to Rudy Giuliani and says, they don't come over here and attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there, right? And it just completely it sent an earthquake through everybody sitting in that auditorium listening to all those candidates debate. So just because I wanted to be as effective as possible, I joined the GOP, but like I said, that doesn't mean that I think everybody who's in the LP is stupid. I think that we absolutely need as many of our fellow libertarians in as many different institutions as possible. I do think that a decentralization of the liberty movement, so to speak, I think that's really a key component of getting all this done. Just in my opinion, I think engaging the Republican Party and taking the Republican Party back from the neocons, making the neocons either politically homeless or forcing them to seek refuge in the Democratic Party. That's a tremendous win, and it's something that's absolutely achievable in our lifetime.
I hope to see that. What was it, even pre-Giuliani moment, that you were drawn to about the Ron Pauls and the Hayeks and the Murray Rothbards in terms of like philosophy or beliefs or anything? Like what was it about what their philosophies were that like really made a big impact on you?
So I guess what was it about something maybe separate from any political issues? What's something like deeper and more philosophical that appealed to me at the time? That's a pretty serious and deep and far back kind of reflection there. I would say it began with it recognizing that libertarianism, and I'm talking about 2014, 2015. I saw that libertarianism was a political philosophy that was built on valuing people as individuals, right? One thing that really just made me angry about leftist politics in 2013, 2014, and it's something that's only just gotten worse since then, was what we call identity politics, right? Just sorting people into different categories based on their race, their sex, their sexual orientation, all the, cisgender versus transgender, all these different things. Putting people into different levels of what really seems like a modern American version of class consciousness, right? It's just taking the old Marxist notions of class consciousness and it's applying them to, instead of a person's class, their race, their sex, their gender, sexual orientation, religion, whatever else, and then assigning to them various levels of oppression points or privilege points based on which of these categories, most of which are immutable, they fit into. that really irritated me. That was so antithetical to treating people as individuals, right? And I began to understand that the leftist philosophical tradition, this wasn't so much something that was based on the 20th century ideas from like John Rawls or Michael Sandel, two sort of, I would say those were two political philosophers who really influenced like the Bill Clinton era of Democrat politics pretty heavily. You know, when we look at leftist politics today, it's unapologetically rooted in Marxism. It's really it's a form of Marxism that has been translated into the climate of the 21st century. The Marxists in this country, at some point in the 20th century, discovered that in the United States, you're never going to use class to divide people in the way that people need to be divided in order for Marxism to take over, right? Because people actually admire people in the upper classes. We aspire to be in the upper class ourselves, right? This the whole notion of the American dream. But whenever you take sort of, the hot button issue, the Achilles heel of American history, race, whenever you take racial tension and you exploit that and you pit people against each other along that, and then, sex being, the second greatest Achilles heel, so to speak, in our culture, probably the issue about which we feel the second most guilty about, so to speak. Whenever we take those sorts of axes and we pit people against each other along them, then you can get the infighting and the division that you need for some sort of Marxist upheaval. So it's a different kind of playbook. I understood that, libertarianism, much more than I think conservatism, just really valued people as individuals, right? And every one of the policy prescriptions that arose out of libertarianism, it seems pretty abundantly clear to me back in 2014. And they ultimately stemmed from a recognition, sort of an a priori recognition that people were individuals. Only individuals take action, right? All human action is derived from individual action. That is the basic premise of what we call the Austrian School of Economics, right? So that's what drew me to it. Is I would say it was in part, derived from an absolute just seething resentment for what I was seeing coming out of leftist politics, which I understood to be not class consciousness, but race consciousness and such things, right? But also just an antidote, to that. Something that I really thought could fight that effectively, and really had the superior moral and logical high ground over that, was the libertarian approach to individualism.
What did people around you think when you were going through these like political revelations and sort of changing and evolving? Did people around your friends and family be like, "Oh, that's great, I support it"? Were they like thought you were crazy? Were they indifferent? Were they right there with you, learning themselves? What was the reaction of others?
Well, I guess I was fortunate that I didn't lose very many friends. Like I had friends whenever I was a young college Democrat who were also either young college Democrats or they were progressive or whatever. We had similar views. They understand the political metamorphosis, really just kind of the deeper philosophical metamorphosis that I've undergone over the last 8 to 10 years. I think that my friends understand, and this isn't just me engaging in some sort of self-serving BS. I think that the people who really know me, who knew me back then, understand that I'm an intellectually honest person, right? Like if I do change from one thing to another, it's not because there's some sort of self-serving purpose, or it's not because I haven't thought it out. So like a couple of good friends of mine who were, had the same political affiliation as me before libertarianism came along and changed me. I'm still friends with them now. Like, I keep in contact with them. One of them, he's a PhD in economics and he's a Marxist. And last week, like he and I had a great conversation with each other. It actually started with us talking about, the leaking of the Supreme Court, opinion on Roe v. Wade. He and I were kind of going back and forth on that. But then we started talking a little bit about like I was sharing with him different ideas from Murray Rothbard, and I was sharing with him, the idea of the subjective theory of value. That is to say, the value in a commodity is determined by whoever the consumer is, whatever value that the consumer ascribes to that commodity. Whereas he was giving me some alternate takes on the old Marxist labor theory of value, which is that the value in a commodity is ultimately determined by the amount of labor that's put into it by the person who created it, not by the boss man who comes in and takes credit for it himself, right? So I was coming at him from a Rothbardian perspective. He was sort of having this conversation with me, trying to get me to reconsider the old Marxist notion of the labor theory of value. We had a great conversation on that. I'm not going to say that we agreed. We don't agree on this. My God, I'm a Rothbardian. He's a Marxist. I mean, you're talking about the two exact opposites of each other, as much so as there can be, I think. But we still had a really good conversation. It was intellectually vigorous. Those are the kinds of things that I really appreciate. I will say this, going back to your question probably 15 minutes ago about had I kind of always been this kid who is more intellectually curious than maybe a kid should be. It didn't occur to me in these terms when you asked the question there, Adam, but I've always been a person who really didn't like small talk all that much. Like this conversation is great, but I've never really been interested in small talk with people. Like I can't just talk to a person about their kids or about their dog or about any of that. Like what cutting the grass or going to the the local ball game or something. I just can't do that. Right? I've always kind of been that way. I've always wanted to talk in different terms with people. Just talk about bigger subjects. I guess to an extent, it probably made me kind of weird as a kid. I wouldn't say that I was a totally weird kid. I wasn't like an
unique
outcast or anything like that. But I was definitely unique in that sense. I wanted to talk about things on a deeper level. Like to me, just engaging in this mindless gibberish about what was happening around the community, it didn't appeal to me that much. And I'm that way now. I can remember feeling that way when I was a little bitty kid, kindergarten, first grade, second grade. And I'm pretty much that way now. I really get excited when I can talk about like bigger picture ideas. I would say that just getting to have those kinds of debates with people and having people understand that I'm a person who's intellectually honest. I'm not some sort of sleazy propagandist who just wants to use every kind of nefarious tactic necessary to make my ideas win, right? I mean, if people don't believe that I'm an honest person, at least with what I believe and the good that I'm trying to do in the world, then I openly invite them to come talk to me. I'll say that I really didn't get that much hatred from that many people. I think I can remember like a couple of like leftist college students I went to school with, like start to talk badly about me whenever I was, sort of just making the arc from left to right. Maybe a couple, but not that many. And I'll tell you, like my family, I love my family to death. They don't really understand kind of what a libertarian is. Like most of them do. But I'll say that I grew up in kind of like a conservative Christian household here, deep in the buckle of the Bible Belt in South Mississippi. Even to the people of a ruby red part of the country like this, libertarianism is a little bit of an alien concept, as what I've discovered over the last several years, is that libertarians have not really done that excellent of a job in actually marketing what it is that they believe in, why they believe in it, or how it is ultimately fundamental to everything that we hold dear as Americans. I mean, even Murray Rothbard, one of my great intellectual champions, he rightly diagnosed the American Revolution as a libertarian revolution. Our country, for all of the faults that it has today, given the fact that we live under a deeply tyrannical super state that shreds away our liberties day after day, we are luckier than most of the people who have ever lived in the world, in the sense that we live in a country that was built on a libertarian revolution, right? So libertarianism, however, has become a little bit of an alien concept to people. Most people don't understand it. I think that that just constitutes a tremendous failure on part of my political movement to really market itself effectively, to show that we're not crazy, or we're very rational human beings. Most of us have our ideas extremely well thought out. You'd be surprised if you actually engaged in a debate with us. But I guess that's that.
Tell me more about when you got into the activism and working for Young Americans for Liberty, some of the highlights. I know obviously things went downhill and a lot has changed with the organization. And did you also get a chance to work with or for or have experiences meeting Ron Paul while once you dove into the whole movement and activism space?
I've met Dr. Paul a few times. I've been lucky enough to talk with him on a couple of different occasions. So they were all pretty brief interactions, but there was one instance. I don't even know if Dr. Paul himself would remember this. This was at an event in Austin, Texas, in 2019. It was an event that Young Americans for Liberty had put on. Dr. Paul was he was there in the conference room after all the speeches and stuff had been over, and Dr. Paul had agreed to take photos with a couple thousand students, with pretty much everybody in attendance. So there was this huge single file line that formed of all these people, students and legislators and donors, everybody who had showed up to the event. They were wanting to get in line to take a picture with Dr. Paul, right? And I was kind of like coordinating that line, like getting people into the single file line and flagging them through so that we can make the line pass as quickly as possible. And I was kind of stationed in front of Dr. Paul there the whole time. This was probably 45 minutes. I'm standing like 3 feet in front of the man, and he and I are just engaging in a little bit of banter with each other as we're getting like one person from the camera, to the spot, and from the spot out of the line to the next person who's standing at the camera, ready to go stand next to Dr. Paul and take their picture. The air conditioning had cut out inside the room, and there were a couple thousand people in there. And we're talking about a pretty big room, but most importantly, it was hot in there. Like I was starting to sweat. Dr. Paul was starting to sweat. So it was a little bit of a stressful experience, I think, for both of us. But yeah, I would say there was a little bit of like joking, a little bit of exchange, and probably a little bit of frustration between me and him both, because it was just taking so awfully long, and we were both just so damn hot. Like, can somebody please turn on the AC again? I mean, Jesus. That's the feeling that we both had. Then there was another case. This was actually just August of last year. I got to take a picture with Dr. Paul backstage. I had long hair at the time. I had like a mullet type thing. I don't know what it was. I don't know what kind of hairstyle I had. Some people called it a mullet. Some people called it a man mane, whatever that's supposed to be. But it was just this big, crazy, haircut that I had. I guess I kind of looked like Michio Kaku or maybe the guy from Ancient Aliens, But I took a picture with Dr. Paul, and I tweeted it, after the picture had been taken, and I put, God, it's so cheesy. I put in the caption above the picture, "There goes my hero," and it was obviously a reference to the Foo Fighters. And I feel goofy in retrospect about having done that. But I remember that picture; it got like well over 1,000 likes, and people were like, "Oh my God, so glad you two are there," blah blah blah. That was a cool moment. I don't know if Dr. Paul would necessarily remember either of those instances. He's an extremely busy guy, as you could well imagine. But I have gotten to interact with him there a couple of times.
It sounds like you had a shared experience with him. I think he's more likely to remember the air conditioner going out than perhaps the photo op the other time, based on that shared experience, even if it's a negative one. I was going to ask you for more highlights of your liberty-minded activism and all that, and we don't have to go deeply into the when Young Americans for Liberty went downhill. You've obviously talked about that on many other podcasts at this point, but I want to hear about some of the highlights, and then kind of like leading up into what you're working on now and whatnot.
So I guess the vast majority of my activism with YOW was on the campaign trail. So just working on different campaigns, doing door knocking and helping lead teams of door knockers and doing phone banking and stuff like that. I worked in several states. I think I can recite them in order: Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, South Carolina, Missouri, Florida, Nebraska, and then New Hampshire. I think that's 9 states I did some campaigning in. A bit later, I briefly did some campaign work in northern Texas. They were actually right outside of Dallas for Shelley Luther. My first campaign, I think, was probably the most memorable. But I mean, I've worked on some amazing campaigns elsewhere. My first campaign was for Glenn Jacobs. So there were seven
Very
of
cool.
us.
Kane from wrestling, of course.
Right. So Glenn Jacobs, that was my first campaign. I'll never forget. I got a call from a Knoxville, Tennessee number, like a week before I was supposed to go on this campaign. I was like, I wonder who that is. And this deep voice. And I was like, hey, is this Reed? I'm like, yeah, this is Glenn Jacobs. How are you? I'm like, I'm good. Like, I didn't want to like be like, starstruck. I had seen a few clips of WWE when I was a kid. I knew that I was talking to a WWE superstar, but it was a surreal experience, right? But he thanked me for joining the campaign, said that this was his personal cell number. Feel free to reach out to him if I had any questions, right? So that was awesome. Fast forward about a week, I've driven from South Mississippi up to Knox County, Tennessee, which is where Knoxville is located. Knoxville is in Knox County. And Glenn, he wasn't running for mayor of Knoxville. He ran for mayor of Knox County. So they have county mayors in some of the counties there in Tennessee. And he won, and he's still serving as county mayor to this day. There were 7 of us door knockers who went there, and we were there for 7 weeks. There throughout April and May. It says March, April, and then a little bit of May. There in 2018. Knox County is an absolutely beautiful place. It's an amazing part of this country with some absolutely incredible people. There were a lot of communities where I got to see, unfortunately, though, the havoc that the opioid crisis has really wreaked on a lot of parts of this country. So Knox County is at the intersection of a few different interstates. There are a few different interstates that run there. And as a result, a lot of the opioids that travel up and down the East Coast, they make their way through Knox County and they cause plenty of problems there. So I was able to see some pretty just, gut-wrenching conditions there in Knox County. And, that really just drove me to campaign even harder, because that's whenever that was one experience where it occurred to me that I wasn't just like campaigning to be campaigning. I wasn't just out here to make money. Like getting Glenn Jacobs elected was going to have real consequences for everyday people who are good people. They were hardworking people. These were people who had, never, as far as I knew, never made any tremendously grave mistakes in their lives, at least no more than any other person, right? Just hardworking folks who wanted to make a living, send their kids to a good school and then send them to a good college, put food on the table. And their neighborhoods, their houses were being wrecked by the opioid crisis, So that drove me over the next several weeks to just campaign as hard as I could for Glenn Jacobs. And a lot of us on the campaign felt that way. It was an absolutely incredible team. Here's the highlight of all that, though. So there were about 45,000 ballots cast across Knox County for that election. It was a Republican primary. Glenn was running against 2 other Republicans, right? 45,000 ballots cast. Glenn Jacobs won by 23 votes. That is substantially less than 1% of the vote. And that was because we had been out there door knocking. I mean, so the Glenn Jacobs campaign, they had spent less on every other aspect of the campaign, less on televised ads, less on all sorts of other campaign gimmicks like campaign cars and campaign buses. And they had focused instead on a grassroots door-to-door strategy. And because of that, Glenn Jacobs won by 23 votes out of 45,000 ballots cast. It was a real nail-biter of an election. That was my first election, by the way. That was my first ever campaign. And so, I mean, it was a surreal kind of experience. But Knox County was an absolutely great place. From there, I went to Kentucky, campaigned for a fellow named Wes Morgan. He's an absolutely great guy, in my opinion. And Kentucky is a gorgeous state. That was my first experience in Kentucky. Kentucky was absolutely beautiful. There's a lot about Kentucky that honestly I miss today. Even though it's several states from where I live, Mississippi, the culture was so remarkably similar. It really kind of felt like Mississippi, but with a lot more mountains, if that makes sense. So Kentucky was a cool place. Not to mention that's where Colonel Sanders is from. I mean, some of the best chicken in the world comes from there. How can you possibly hate Kentucky all that much? And then just several other campaigns after that. I mean, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of different campaigns across this country. I guess that's one thing that I feel fortunate about is I've worked in other parts of the world. So whenever I was as an undergraduate student, that was whenever I spent a little bit of time working over in Italy. Right after Italy, I spent some months in the UK studying over there. And that was an absolutely incredible experience. I got to go inside a lot of the rooms where J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis actually taught courses at the University of Oxford. I got to see the places where Lewis Carroll wrote, Alice in Wonderland. I got to go inside of the pubs where Lewis and Tolkien and the other Inklings would sit down and write and share their literary ideas with each other. Got to go all over Italy, all over the UK, including Scotland and Wales. I got to see some absolutely remarkable things, Stonehenge, the Salisbury Cathedral, the Canterbury Cathedral, Swansea, Wales, Edinburgh. There's a volcano in the middle of Edinburgh, Scotland, called Arthur's Seat. And it's just, obviously they're just playing on Arthurian lore and Arthurian tradition. But I got to do and see some incredible things while I was sort of going on my own philosophical journey, trying to understand myself, trying to find myself, trying to find ways to satisfy all these different kinds of intellectual and artistic and creative interests, that I've had throughout my life. So some of my friends kind of poke fun at me because they say that I've become like a little bit more of like a more radical libertarian over the last couple of years. And it's only been over the last couple of years. Like I have a lot of libertarian friends who've known me since 2016, 2017. And they say, Reed, you haven't always been this radical. You haven't always been this Rothbardian, and I would say, in all fairness, I probably didn't discover that I had the sort of deep hatred for the state that I have until about 2020, honestly, during the age of COVID.
That makes sense.
Come again?
I said that makes sense.
Yeah. But, I'll just say that I got to travel all over Italy, walk around inside the Sistine Chapel, walk around inside the Colosseum. I got to help the Italian people discover a small part of their heritage. Actually, a couple of the artifacts that I excavated are on display in museums in Italy now, something that I feel particularly proud of. I got to do all those things I described in the UK. I got to go across this country, not just campaigning, but doing different archaeological projects. I've got to help several other archaeologists edit their work, and prepare for publication so that they can share their scientific findings with the world. I've got to do a lot of different things, and I still got to discover that I was, I still got to discover that I was at war with the state at the age of 26, which is not exactly a bad age to realize that you're at a lifelong war with the state. So, I've had a pretty good life thus far, and I guess I feel pretty fortunate that I get to work in a career where I can just take my intellectual curiosity and translate it over into real tangible action to the benefit of other people.
Very cool. And what are you working on specifically these days in terms of your political aspirations?
Sure. So like I said a little while ago, I had my hand in several different cookie jars. A lot of these projects, as they come together, they're going to become public. But the more pieces that get put together, I will say one thing I'm working on right now is I'm working with Ben Swan. You know who Ben Swan is? Oh
yeah, journalist, independent journalist.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So I'm working with Ben Swan now. He's an absolutely great guy in my opinion. Working with him, helping him generate some publicity for a really exciting project he's doing. It's called Sovereign. So it's a video-based, blockchain secured social media platform where users can actually support independent journalists. So journalists who have things they want to report on, they just want to report on the truth, or they just want to report on what people might believe on this subject or that subject. They can go on Sovereign, SOVREN, and they can share their content, and they can actually pay to support other creators, other journalists, other reporters. So it's a really exciting project that Ben is working on there. I'm working on some other folks across the liberty movement to build something that I think libertarian politics definitely needs, which is a practical means of breaking away from Koch libertarianism. Koch libertarianism, meaning just the variety of sort of whitewash, beltway regime libertarianism that has been funded and subsidized and spearheaded by the Kochs since the late 70s, going all the way back to their feud with Murray Rothbard. I think it accounts for so much of why libertarianism is weak and why libertarianism has failed to properly market itself to the people to whom to those who are most susceptible, so to speak, to converting to it, right? So just since the late '70s, the Kochs have really dominated libertarian politics through different institutions, different organizations, different think tanks. They have sort of stuck their hands into like a sort of a great spider or a great octopus extending its tentacles in every direction. I guess that's probably how I visualize the Koch dynasty and their influence over libertarian politics. So much of so many people make the critical distinction between like right libertarians and left libertarians. Yes, that's a profound distinction. It's an important distinction to make, but probably the most meaningful distinction we can make between, amongst libertarians, and one that I think can actually translate to more success for libertarian politics in the future, is that exists between the Koch libertarians and the Mises libertarians, right? So it was in 1977 that someone very deeply involved with Koch libertarianism, they told Lew Rockwell that Ludwig von Mises was too radical of a political figure to base a movement around. And that's actually what inspired Lew Rockwell and Murray Rothbard and a few others to go and build the Ludwig von Mises Institute in the early 80s, either in 1982 and 1983. So I think that, this is a long-standing dispute that we see between Koch libertarianism and Mises libertarianism. Koch libertarianism is much more well-funded. It's had the financial means of achieving much more influence and much more control over the direction that libertarianism takes, right? I would say a much more centrist direction. After all, we reflect on, was that 1980, is 1984 that David Koch, no, I think it might have been 1988. I can't remember. I can't believe I can't remember which election cycle this was. David Koch running, he was the running mate for the Libertarian Party's, presidential campaign. He said that he considered himself a low tax liberal, which is just an absolutely atrocious way of marketing libertarianism. That's nowhere even close to what libertarianism actually is. Like trying to appeal to those on the left by saying you're a low tax liberal. It obviously repulsed everybody. And of course, the Austrians and the more sort of populist, pragmatic libertarians were very upset about that. We call them pragmatic libertarians, but the right-wing libertarians, those who would go on to form the Mises libertarian tradition, were extremely upset about that. And so it's, the Mises libertarians, that's sort of how I conceptualize them. They've been around for the last 50, 60 years. They just haven't, in my opinion, had the means of being as influential as they should be, right? And so what I'm trying to work on right now is bringing together a lot of the right people across the libertarian movement to actually build the sort of parallel Mises network that's going to be needed to overtake and overthrow the Kochs, to run them out of libertarian politics and to get them to go find solace and comfort somewhere else where they actually belong. I don't think it's likely that we're going to be able to outspend them, but we can mobilize in a grassroots fashion, to really bring libertarianism back to what it's supposed to be. We really have to think about libertarianism as it's a right-wing ideology. A lot of people are scared of it. They think it's scary to think of this philosophy as something that's right-wing or far right, but we are the successors to the old right. The old right that was formed in staunch opposition to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal, and that fought the neoconservatives tooth and nail throughout the mid-20th century. Those are our most immediate ideological forebears. It was the old right that went on to form a big part of the libertarian movement there in the 70s and the 80s. And then, of course, that libertarian movement, it has been split between, Koch types and Mises types. And so what I'm trying to work on now, and I'm doing this through several different institutions, some of whom have been around for a long time, and a few of them are up and coming. I'm actually trying to build the infrastructure, the sort of mesh network that's going to be needed to reclaim libertarian politics and to take it in the direction that it should have been in the whole time.
That sounds like a good plan, and I definitely support that. Pushing that Mises philosophy, whether it's through the Republican Party or through the Libertarian Party and the Mises Caucus, like I am, a part of myself, or just through outside of politics and through the culture. Like, we're doing our best, and the work you do is definitely commendable, and I definitely appreciate your time and all the stories and the deep dives into Reed the kid and how he became Reed the adult, and how all your interests evolved. And it's interesting to hear you talk about like the idea of being a Renaissance person and wanting to look get your hands in many different areas. And a lot of the people that you were talking about did just that, whether it's the founding fathers or even Ron Paul, who's been a writer and a politician and a doctor and had his hands in many other areas as a well-rounded person. And Murray Rothbard too was as far as I understand, a very well-rounded person who loved life and enjoyed life to its fullest. Like I think we're looking at the right influences for sure. Where can people find and follow you? If there's anything else you wanted to mention or discuss, I'll give you the floor for that as well to do your thing.
Sure. So I mean, the best place to find me is at Twitter. I'm usually just on Twitter. I'm not really that active on a lot of other platforms yet. Kind of prefer Twitter just because as a writer, I kind of like the idea. I like the challenge of being forced to get an idea out in as few words as possible. So my Twitter handle is at jreedcooley, JREEDCOOLEY.
Very cool. Thank you again. I appreciate the time, and let's talk more soon for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, Adam. Thank you.
Oh, you got it. Later. So there you have it, episode 129 and my conversation with Reed Cooley. That was fun, and I definitely appreciate Reed taking the time and for sharing his story with me. It's very interesting to hear about his evolution as a person, and I look forward to following his career and journey moving forward. But anyway, for everything about this show, of course, head to peoplewelovepodcast.com. That's at People We Love Podcast on Instagram. And I am at Adam Choit on Instagram and Twitter. Check out my other podcast, at Tedeschi Trucks Podcast on Instagram, TEDESCHI Trucks Podcast, all about the band, Tedeschi Trucks Band. But I think that's about all I got for today. I appreciate you guys listening. Thank you as always. And let's talk soon. Peace.